Famous adapters throughout history. Of course, there's Dutch guy, Dutch boy. He's one of the early ones, and the Dutch still are kind of famous for this. This is his finger in the dike. And then the modern version that the Dutch, Holland, which is very much below sea level by several feet. They don't have the high hills we have. They've gone the route in many ways of nature-based solutions, but also using large engineered solutions. So I don't show it here, but I've got some pretty good maps of Holland, where every major waterway now has a gate structure on it. Very expensive. What I like about this slide is it reminds me to mention that I'm on the flood control engineering side, and that when you build something, you have to maintain it. And I would say out of our staff of 12 people, maybe 4 or 5 are involved just in maintaining our network of levees and pump stations, and under them they have a small army of conservation corps staff and building maintenance people who maintain the pumps. So it's not just enough. You have to remember when you build something like a wall or a dike, you have to keep your finger in it at all times, and there's a cost associated with maintaining. Other famous adapters were this guy, Moses, who was able to, back then they were able to sort of adapt the water to meet the land. Now, we don't have quite as powerful as a client as he had. So we're more adapting ourselves and the land to the rising water. But the principles are kind of the same, and be able to sort of manage, retreat, phase, and adapt. So that was that other category of solution. And then finally, this guy went for more accommodation. So floatable development. And this almost harkens back to the Marin houseboats that were much bigger on the baseline. Chateau was actually a pretty fun scene back in the day, before my time. And these are, obviously, these are the people who didn't plan for sea level rise. We're open to great, we'll get there somewhere. So now I'm just going to run quickly, because I know we have a lot to cover today. Just a quick discussion of the various toolbox solutions, alternatives that you'll have today when you plan for Marin Island. The hard engineering runs traditional levees, seawalls, tide gates, and pump stations. And just a quick note about seawalls. I mean, it's obviously a hard structure. Its advantage is that you can do it in a small right-of-way. So in areas where you don't have a big buffer between the urban edge and the bay, that's when you can, a wall as such becomes, in some locations, maybe the only solution, or one that you can do within a smaller right-of-way. Of course, big impacts, like a lot of these are going to get a cost. And then seawalls are also known for having secondary impacts. They'll move the flooding. They don't dissipate energy, they more reflect it. So this often will result in unanticipated impacts away from the wall. And here's an example. This is one of the famous New Orleans walls situations. And you can see how kind of a dangerous spot to be. And then afterwards, maybe the walls, they're called razor dikes. Essentially, it's a flood wall. Seawall. You can see that they have a lot of maintenance and problematic. They say nature bats last, and I think in a lot of cases we see that, especially after big storm events. Levees, we have a lot of levees in the county. We don't have any really FEMA certified levees, but we have a lot of levee structures. When you have a room, I think they're more stable, the cost is lower than a wall, but the trade-off is you need more room, essentially. You need more right of way to build them. And in a lot of areas we're running up against that. And that's something you'll have to sort of pay attention to as you're looking at making these decisions for the island. Flood walls and pump stations, where we have more appropriate for riverine flooding with the kind of lower walls, but important that we combine the pump station in with it as a reminder to ourselves that when you build a wall, you still have water behind the wall, and you have to get rid of that water. So I would say most of what we in flood control are building and managing these days are flood walls and pump stations, and it's arguably the most expensive way to deal with storm water is to pump it. And of course the power goes out usually when they're during a storm event, so that's when we want the electricity. So then you're looking at having backup generators, which are $1 million per. So these are really the decisions and trade-offs that we're always making. All of them expensive, but essentially, as you plan for the island, up your rivers and canals, if you want to put flood walls to protect things, you have a card that has a flood wall and pump station and associated costs. And then tide gates. The idea that in more bayments and creeks that we can start looking at blocking the tides, kind of going back to the Holland example. This is a popular idea. I think in practice there's a lot of secondary unanticipated consequences with tide gates. They're learning that in Venice now. They did it called the Moses Gate, I believe, a very expensive tide gate structure because you got Venice floods. But now they're seeing a lot of water quality impacts behind the wall. So, I think they do have their place. There's also fish impacts, so there's a number of things associated that are costly, but I think they're, in certain circumstances, a viable and a reasonable adaptation alternative. Okay, now we will go quickly to the more nature-based solutions, and again, we'll have little tokens for all of these, which in the category of horizontal levees, dune beaches, just marsh and wetlands, and reefs are really offshore structures. So horizontal levees, it's really kind of a new name for an old concept, which is a levee with a marsh in front of it. And then the idea is they work together as a unit, that the marsh absorbs and dissipates the wave energy, allowing you to do more with it. You're not trying to reflect all the wave energy with just a levee, but by having a marsh in front, you're allowing nature to help you, the landscape to help you dissipate the wave energy, and allows you to have a smaller levee and achieve the same flood reduction, flood protection benefit. Plus, you get habitat benefits. Of course, is a major benefit. You're working with nature. Of course, it's depending on what the elevations are. You might have costs for earthwork, and you need a larger right-of-way now. Now you need a slope of 20 to 1, 30 to 1 in front, so a pretty flat, gradual wetlands in front of this. So you need more room. Marshes, we've talked a lot about. You've probably heard a lot about the value of marshes. Kind of like the idea of horizontal levees. Nature sponges, they do a lot to help attenuate waves. So where you have room and it's a little more sheltered, you can use the tidal marshes essentially to help you with flood protection. Dune beaches, dunes, very applicable out here, do a lot for, it's a part of the natural system in terms of attenuating waves. When you have to replenish it, where it's been cut off from the headlands, that's a big cost issue, where you get the sand from, how far you have to pump it. But I think it's a viable thing to look at, so we included it in this version of the game. And there's some examples of what the Dutch are using. Zand motor, which is basically just a large sand dredge, hydraulic sand dredge, splaying the sand out. And they're trying to go away from the more mechanical solutions and using landscape-based solutions to the extent possible. Now they also have a culture that's a little different in terms of using the greater good. They had their big defining event was in the 50s. They had a big flood, killed thousands of people. So as a culture, that's sort of there were people more willing to give up their farms and land and resources for the greater good than our culture is somewhat. It allows them to do things somewhat on a bigger scale, but on a small scale, sand is certainly, and beaches are a very effective wave dissipation alternative. Another picture of a Holland coast. Finally, we changed this from reefs to offshore structures, and this includes everything from reefs all the way now to what they're doing a lot on the East Coast is looking at is more barrier islands, actually constructing barrier islands. I was very involved in designing a beach restoration on the bay side, which has a lot of the same benefits. They're doing it on a much larger scale, I think, in New York. Barrier island restoration. So the height of the structure, the more wave energy dissipation you get, that helps you with your flooding. Not so much for long-term sea level rise, but for dealing with the storm events, that storm wave energy. And they've been applied, in Florida, I think Hawaii, and other places, pretty successfully. But our second category is accommodate, this idea that we're going to live or work or redesign around the water. Elevate buildings, you've probably seen some of these out in some of your areas. They're more effective for storm flooding. I mean, an event that comes and goes. If the tide's going to be in every day, you're going to have to try to access, unless you're going to access your property just at certain tide times, it's going to be a little less effective during permanent inundation. But in the short term, I think there's a lot of value in elevating, getting the structures out of the way. Gets you FEMA discounts on your insurance, of course. Floodable development, we talked about, this is the idea of redeveloping the community to allow for flooding of low-lying areas, but you're sort of designing the community to be flood protective. I think it's something that really is an interesting thing that's worthy of more conversation, especially on the bay side, but even out here, because it's a a way in an area that is in a housing shortage of actually self-generating some revenue that can also be used to use for adaptation. But of course, that leaves a bigger discussion of trade-offs, and that's really why we're here today, because it changes maybe the feel of the community. Because I know the people on Marin Island are very happy with their more single-family home, rural kind of lifestyle, but floatable developments, what pays for it, the private developers, is more density. So you might have more density in the community as a way of generating revenue to help pay for more improvements. So these sorts of trade-offs are kind of in the thought process, and that's what they're doing more in cities and elsewhere. And I think this is where we're going to go in a lot of areas, especially Bayside, where there's just, unlikely that the federal government's going to come in and bail everybody out, so to speak. So this is a way of generating through redevelopment. Elevated roads is kind of fun because back in Ventura Causeway, a long time ago, before we had a lot of yellow machinery that moves dirt around so easily, we used to build a lot of causeways because we couldn't move dirt. So in some ways, they're a little more eco-friendly, but building them now, they're very high. There's some costs for the calculators, I think, to raise, to build these, just general costs. Causeways are really just low bridges. If you want to relocate or maintain roads in the same location, and there's some scenarios of sea level rise on an island, you'll probably have to build causeways. And then there's cards for that that keep track of how many miles you're doing, and then we'll total it up. And this is another example of a road that would have to be sort of elevated or protected. I believe, yeah, Marin, Photoshop magic to show how it might look if it was made into a causeway. Again, it's very effective, but expensive solution. Finally, the last category, main category of adaptation, is this idea of retreat. I would say retreat is zoning, sort of regulatory solutions too. Retreat is essentially taking the areas that we really cannot afford to protect and moving them back, and then using that area for more nature-based solutions, and not trying to hold the line on the tide in this current location. We probably should come up with a better word than retreat, because it sounds like we're, but in a sense we are, but negative, I suppose. It's relocate. We could talk about things like, should we be having, now, before a big storm event comes, should we be looking at pre-storm planning and zoning changes, and this idea of should we be allowed to rebuild in the same spot that got washed out after a storm event, grandfathering the locations. These are very big sort of topics that are very much being dealt with at Hurricane Sandy on the East Coast, where in some ways people have rebuilt, been washed out, rebuilt in the same location, washed out again. So we're kind of on a cycle of paying for the same thing over and over again. Rolling easements is this idea that you can obviously stay on the property, but you're not allowed to harden it. So that is, as the area washes away, you're allowed to live there and move the buildings around, but not try to fight it by hardening, by arboring the shoreline. Restrictions, the Coastal Commission is probably all aware now is requiring more detailed, long-term, projective consultant studies before anything gets done. It's becoming more and more what they're requiring. So this is an option for these people on the island for sort of pre-zoning and studies, and then using the idea of maybe using stricter codes like the FEMA B codes, even the coastal AE zones, where they're not currently required, but requiring the stricter building codes even above the requirements of FEMA. And of course, our goal on this is consensus. Finally, my last slide is a note about costs, and then we're just going to talk about the game. In the real world, costs are messy. They depend on so many factors, and where you are on the ground, quality, and all. But in the game world, where we are today, things are a little simpler in that we've taken an average of realistic but single costs, and we've assigned the cost of each card, so to speak, each alternative. And then as you do, say, a mile of roadway, we'll count up those number of miles. Probably not today, but probably in the intervening week or two. And then we'll have some idea of what sort of ballpark we're in terms of what it costs to do this sort of adaptation work on the ground. So we've gone through and assigned costs to all the different cards. The numbers aren't here, but they're in another figures that we have. And so you don't need to worry about so much today, but we've taking the range of realistic and single costs. So this, just a caveat that says the real world cost will vary, but I think this gets us there. And that's it for me. I think it's good.
Thanks, Roger. So you'll notice a brightly colored island in front of you at your table. So after the break, we'll all come back and play this game. The first step will be that everybody will pick an asset that they would like to protect. And so there's little tabs at each table. So each person will mark their asset with this little tab, and you don't have to protect the same thing. So if somebody picks what you wanted, pick something, your next favorite thing. That way we can get as much protected as possible. After everybody's picked their asset, you'll take a few minutes to fill out your plan commissioner worksheet. Let's see, can somebody hold one up for me? It's with the blue bar at the top. So you'll write your asset there and then put down any of the adaptation measures you think might be appropriate. So those are on your reference sheet that are on the longer 8.5 by 14 on the back side of that. And they're also along the bottom of the game board on the border. So you can use that as your reference. And then think about what some of the pros and cons might be. And then we will go one at a time around the table. There's a sweet dice I got for everybody, 10 sides. So you can first roll, I guess I skipped that step. You'll first roll to see what order you'll put down your favorite asset, claim your assets, and then follow that same order in putting down your adaptation strategies and then continuing on with the discussion. So the main impacts that we want you to think about, they're all listed on the worksheet and on the game board, so costs and funding, obviously, private or public property concerns that might arise, any environmental, ecological concerns, and of course any equity or social justice concerns that you might think of. Those are a little harder to imagine, but I think, as you mentioned earlier, thinking about how things might be playing out. So if the electricity goes out, how might that affect certain people more than others, for example? And then if there's any other consequences that you can think of, please feel free to share those and write those down. We really want to encourage that trade-off discussion that Roger mentioned earlier. And then after that, we'll have every group will negotiate, decide if that's the final map that they would like to propose. We'll share it with the group. The facilitator has a score sheet to add up the costs of all of the adaptation measures that have been laid down so we can come up with some sort of overall story. And then after the meeting, we're going to take these back, compile the information, and actually say, if we were to do something like this, this is the total cost it would be, here are some of the trade-offs, and try to give a story to each map that you guys have generated here today. After you've gotten familiar with adaptation strategies and the trade-offs, we have workbooks that are location specific. So wherever your community is that you want to work on, you could take these strategies that you've learned about and actually draw them on Sinton Beach, or on East Shore, or on Molinas, or on Muir Beach. And that's more of an individual exercise because we didn't want to spend an hour here debating over which house to protect on Sea Drift, or so on and so forth. So with that, I would like to invite everybody to go take some refreshments from the Palace Market and Calgary Creamery, who sponsor our snacks today. So we'll call you back to the games in about 10 minutes.
And a reminder to visit the sustainability team's booth back here as well.
Good morning, Bill. How are you?
I'm good, how are you?